14 and the first verse. One day when Samson was in Timnah, he noticed a certain Philistine girl, and when he got home, he told his father and mother that he wanted to marry her. They objected strenuously. Why don't you marry a Jewish girl, they asked. Why must we go and get a wife from these heathen Philistines? Isn't there one girl among all the people of Israel you could marry? But Samson told his father, she is the one I want. Get her for me. His father and mother didn't realize that the Lord was behind the request, for God was setting a trap for the Philistines, who at that time were the rulers of Israel. As Samson and his parents were going to Timnah, a young lion attacked Samson in the vineyards in the outskirts of the town. At that moment, the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and since he had no weapon, he ripped the lion's jaws apart and did it as easily as though it were a young goat. But he didn't tell his father and mother about it. Upon arriving at Timnah, he talked with the girl and found her to be just what he wanted. So the arrangements were made. When he returned for the wedding, he turned off the path to look at the carcass of the lion, and he found a swarm of bees in it and some honey. He took some of the honey with him, eating as he went, and gave some of it to his father and mother, but he didn't tell them where he had gotten it. As his father was making final arrangements for the marriage, Samson threw a party for 30 young men of the village, as was the custom of the day. When Samson asked if they would like to hear a riddle, they replied that they would. If you solve my riddle during these 7 days of celebration, he said, I'll give you 30 plain robes and 30 fancy robes. But if you can't solve it, then you must give me the robes to me. Then you must give the robes to me. All right, they agreed. Let's hear it. This was his riddle. Food came out of the eater and sweetness from the strong. 3 days later, they were still trying to figure it out. On the fourth day, they said to his new wife, get the answer from your husband or we'll burn you down your father's house with you in it. Were we invited to this party just to make us poor? So Samson's wife broke down in tears before him and said, you don't love me at all. You hate me. For you have told a riddle to my people and haven't told me the answer. I haven't even told it to my father and mother. Why should I tell you? He replied. So she cried whenever she was with him and kept it up for the remainder of the celebration. At last, on the seventh day, he told her the answer, and she, of course, gave the answer to the young men. So before sunset of the seventh day, they gave him their reply. What is sweeter than honey, they asked, and what is stronger than a lion? If you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't have found the answer to my riddle, he retorted. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went to the city of Ashkelon, killed 30 men, took their clothing, and gave it to the young men who had told him the answer to his riddle. But he was furious about it and abandoned his wife and went back home to live with his father and mother. So his wife was married instead to the fellow who had been the best man at Samson's wedding. Or that's like a soap opera. Judges 15:1. Later on during the wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat as a present to his wife, intending to sleep with her. But her father wouldn't let him in. I really thought you hated her, he explained, so I married her to your best man. But look, her sister is prettier than she. Marry her instead. Samson was furious. You can't blame me for whatever happens now, he shouted. So he went out and caught 300 foxes and tied their tails together in pairs with a torch between each pair. Then he lit the torches and let the foxes run through the fields of the Philistines, burning the grain to the ground along with all the sheaves and shocks of grain and destroying the olive trees. Who did this? The Philistines demanded. Samson was the reply, because his wife's father gave her to another man. So the Philistines came and got the girl and her father and burned them alive. Now my vengeance will strike again, Samson vowed. So he attacked them with great fury and killed many of them. Then he went to live in a cave in the rock of Etam. The Philistines in turn sent a huge posse into Judah and raided Lehi. Why have you come here? The men of Judah asked. And the Philistines replied, to capture Samson and to do to him as he has done to us. So 3,000 men of Judah went down to get Samson at the cave in the rock of Etam. What are you doing to us? They demanded of him. Don't you realize that the Philistines are our rulers? But Samson replied, I only paid them back for what they did to me. We have come to capture you and take you to the Philistines, the men of Judah told him. All right, Samson said, but promise me that you won't kill me yourselves. No, they replied, we won't do that. So they tied him with 2 new ropes and led him away. As Samson and his captors arrived at Lehi, the Philistines shouted with glee. But then the strength of the Lord came upon Samson, and the ropes with which he was tied snapped like thread and fell from his wrists. Then he picked up a donkey's jawbone that was lying on the ground and killed 1,000 Philistines with it. Tossing away the jawbone, he remarked, heaps upon heaps, all with the donkey's jaw. I've killed 1,000 men, all with the donkey's jaw. The place has been called Jawbone Hill ever since. But now he is very thirsty, and he prayed to the Lord and said, You've given Israel such a wonderful deliverance through me today. Must I now die of thirst and fall to the mercy of these heathen? So the Lord caused water to gush out from the hollow in the ground, and Samson's spirit was revived as he drank. Then he named the place the spring of the man who prayed, and the spring is still there today. Samson was Israel's leader for the next 20 years, but the Philistines still control the land. Judges chapter 16, verse 1. One day Samson went to the Philistine city of Gaza and spent the night with a prostitute. Word soon spread that he had been seen in the city, so the police alerted, and many men of the city lay in wait all night at the gate of the city to capture him if he tried to leave. In the morning, they thought, when there is enough light, we'll find him and kill him. Samson stayed in bed with the girl until midnight, oh Lord, then went out to the city gates and lifted them, and with 2 gateposts right out of the ground. He put them on his shoulders and carried them to the top of the mountain across from Hebron. Later on, he fell in love with a girl named Delilah over in the valley of Sorek. The 5 heads of the Philistine nation went personally to her and demanded that she find out from Samson what made him so strong, so that they would know how to overpower and subdue him and put him in chains. Each of us will give you $1,000 for this job, they promised. So Delilah begged Samson to tell her his secret. Please tell me, Samson. Why are you so strong? She pleaded. I don't think anyone could ever capture you. Well, Samson replied, if I were tied with 7 raw leather bowstrings, I would become as weak as anyone else. So they brought her the 7 bowstrings, and while he slept, she tied him with them. Some men were hiding in the next room, so as soon as she had tied him up, she exclaimed, Samson, the Philistines are here. Then he snapped the bowstrings like cotton thread, and so his secret was not discovered. Afterward, Delilah said to him, you're making fun of me. You told me a lie. Please tell me how you can be captured. Well, he said, if I'm tied with brand new ropes, which have never been used, I will be as weak as other men. So that time, as he slept, Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. The men were hiding in the next room as before. Again, Delilah exclaimed, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you. But he broke the ropes from his arms like spider webs. You have mocked me again and told me lies, Delilah complained. Now tell me how you can really be captured. Well, he said, if you weave my hair into your loom. So while he slept, she did just that and then screamed, the Philistines have come, Samson. And he woke up and yanked his hair away and breaking the loom. How can you say you love me when you don't confide in me, she whined. You've made fun of me 3 times now, and you still haven't told me what makes you strong. She nagged at him every day until he couldn't stand it any longer and finally told her his secret. My hair has never been cut, he confessed, for I've been a Nazarite to God since before my birth. If my hair were cut, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as anyone else. Delilah realized that he had finally told her the truth, so she sent for the 5 Philistine leaders. Come just this once more, she said, for this time he has told me everything. So they brought the money with them. She lulled him to sleep with his head in her lap, and they brought in a barber and cut off his hair. Delilah began to hit him, but she could see that his strength was leaving him. Then she screamed, the Philistines are here to capture you, Samson. And he woke up and thought, I was due as before. I'll just shake myself free. But he didn't realize the Lord had left him. So the Philistines captured him and gouged out his eyes and took him to Gaza, where he was bound with bronze chains and made him to grind grain in the prison. But before long, his hair began to grow again. The Philistine leaders declared a great festival to celebrate the capture of Samson. The people made sacrifices to their god Dagon and excitedly praised him. Our God has delivered our enemy Samson to us. They gloated as they saw him in chains. The scourge of our nation, who killed so many of us, is now in our power. Half drunk by now, the people demanded, bring out Samson so we can have some fun with him. So he was brought from the prison and made to stand at the center of the temple, between the 2 pillars supporting the roof. Samson said to the boy who was leading him by the hand, place my hands against the 2 pillars. I want to rest against them. By then, the temple was completely filled with people. The 5 Philistine leaders were there, as well as 3,000 people in the balconies who were watching Samson and making fun of him. Then Samson prayed to the Lord and said, oh, Lord Jehovah, remember me again. Please strengthen me one more time so that I may pay back the Philistines for the loss of at least one of my eyes. Then Samson pushed against the pillars with all his might. Let me die with the Philistines, he prayed. And the temple crashed down upon the Philistine leaders and all the people. So those he killed at the moment of his death were more than those that he had killed during his entire lifetime. Later, his brothers and other relatives came down to get his body, and they brought him back home and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, where his father Manoah was buried. He had led Israel 20 years. Judges chapter 17, verse 1. In the hill country of Ephraim lived a man named Micah. One day he said to his mother that $1,000 you thought was stolen from you and you were cursing about, well, I stole it. Huh? One day he said to his mother, that $1,000 you thought was stolen from you and you were cursing about, well, I stole it. God bless you for confessing it, his mother replied, so he returned the money to her. I'm going to give it to the Lord as a credit for your account, she declared. I'll have an idol carved for you and plate it with the silver. So his mother took a fifth of it to the silversmith, and the idol he made from it was placed in Micah's shrine. Micah had many idols in his collection, also an ephod and some teraphim, and he installed one of his sons as the priest. For in those days, Israel had no king, so everyone did whatever he wanted to, whatever seemed right in his own eyes. One day, a young priest from the town of Bethlehem in Judah arrived in that area of Ephraim looking for a good place to live. He happened to stop at Micah's house as he was traveling through. Where are you from? Micah asked him, and he replied, I'm a priest from Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm looking for a place to live. Well, stay here with me, Micah said. You can be my priest. I will give you $100 a year, plus a new suit and your board and room. The young man agreed to this and became as one of Micah's sons, so Micah consecrated him as his personal priest. I know the Lord will really bless me now, Micah exclaimed, because now I have a genuine priest working for me. Judges chapter 18, verse 1. As had already been stated, there was no king in Israel at that time. The tribe of Dan was trying to find a place to settle, for they had not yet driven out the people living in the land assigned to them. So the men of Dan chose 5 army heroes from the cities of Zorah and Eshtaol as scouts to go and spy out the land that they were supposed to settle in. Arriving in the hill country of Ephraim, they stayed at Micah's house. Noticing the young Levite's accent, they took him aside and asked him, what are you doing here? Why did you come? He told them about his contract with Micah and that he was his personal priest. Well, then, they asked, ask God whether or not our trip will be successful. Yes, the priest replied, all is well. The Lord has taken care of you. So the 5 men went down to the town of Laish and noticed how secure everyone felt. Their manner of life was Phoenician and they were wealthy. They lived quietly and were unprepared for an attack, for there were no tribes in the area strong enough to try it. They lived a great distance from their relatives in Sidon and had little or no contact with nearby villages. So the spies returned to their people in Zorah and Eshtaol. What about it? They were asked. What did you find? And the men replied, let's attack. We've seen the land and it is ours for the taking, a broad, fertile, wonderful place, a real paradise. The people aren't even prepared to defend themselves. Come on, let's go, for God has given it to us. So 600 armed troops of the tribe of Dan set out from Zorah and Eshtaol. They camped first at a place west of Kiriath Jearim, which is still called the camp of Dan, and they went up to the hill country of Ephraim. And as they passed the home of Micah, the 5 spies told the others, there is a shrine in there with an ephod, some teraphim, and many plated idols. It's obvious what we ought to do. So the 5 men went over to the house with all of the armed men standing just outside the gate. They talked to the young priest and asked him how he was getting along. Then the 5 spies entered the shrine and took the idols, the ephod, and the teraphim. What are you doing? The young priest demanded when he saw them carrying them out. Be quiet and come with us, they said. Be a priest for all of us. Isn't it better for you to be a priest to a whole tribe in Israel instead of just to one man, in his private home? The young priest was then quite happy to go with them, and he took along the ephod, the teraphim, and the idols. They started on their way again, placing their children, cattle, and household goods at the front of the column. When they were quite a distance from Micah's home, Micah and some of his neighbors came chasing after them, yelling at them to stop. What do you want chasing after us like this? The men of Dan demanded. What do you mean, what do I want? Micah retorted. You've taken away all my gods and my priests, and I have nothing left. Be careful how you talk, mister, the men of Dan replied. Somebody's apt to get angry and kill every one of you. Ooh, Jesus, have mercy, my God. So the men of Dan kept going. When Micah saw that there were too many of them for him to handle, he turned back home. Then, with Micah's idols and the priests, the men of Dan arrived at the city of Lachish. There weren't even any guards, so they went in and slaughtered all the people and burned the city to the ground. There was no one to help the inhabitants, for they were too far away from Sidon, and they had no local allies, for they had no dealings with anyone. This happened in the valley next to Beth Rehob. Then the people of the tribe of Dan rebuilt the city and lived there. The city was named Dan after their ancestor Israel's son, but it had originally been called Laish. Then they set up the idols and appointed a man named Jonathan, son of Gershom and grandson of Moses, and his sons as their priests. This family continued its priests until the city was finally conquered by its enemies. So Micah's idols were worshipped by the tribe of Dan as long as the tabernacle remained in Shiloh. Judges 19:1. At this time, before Israel had a king, there was no man of the tribe of Levi living on the far side of the hill country of Ephraim who brought on. Okay, let's read this again. At this time, before Israel had a king, there was a man of the tribe of Levi living on the far side of the hill country of Ephraim who brought home a girl from Bethlehem in Judah to be his concubine. But she became angry with him and ran away and returned to her father's home in Bethlehem and was there for about 4 months. Then her husband, taking along a servant and an extra donkey, went to see her to try to win her back again. When he arrived at her home, she let him in and introduced him to her father, who was delighted to meet him. Her father urged him to stay a while, so he stayed 3 days, and they all had a pleasant time. On the fourth day, they were up early, ready to leave, but the girl's father insisted on their having breakfast first. Then he pleaded with them to stay one more day, as they were having such a good time. At first, the man refused, but his father-in-law kept urging him until finally he gave in. The next morning, they were up early again, and the girl's father pleaded, "Stay just today and leave sometime this evening." So they had another day of feasting. That afternoon, as he and his wife and servant were preparing to leave, his father-in-law said, "Look, it's getting late. Just stay tonight, and we will have a pleasant evening together, and tomorrow you can get up early and be on your way." But this time the man was adamant, so they left, getting as far as Jerusalem, also called Jebus, before dark. His servant said to him, "It's getting too late to travel. Let's stay here tonight." No, his master said, "We can't stay in this heathen city where there are no Israelites. We will go on to Gibeah or possibly Ramah." So they went on. The sun was setting just as they came to Gibeah, a village of the tribe of Benjamin. So they went there for the night, but as no one invited them in, they encamped in the village square. Just then an old man came by on his way home from his work in the fields. He was originally from the hill country of Ephraim, but was now living in Gibeah, even though it was in the territory of Benjamin. When he saw the travelers camped in the square, he asked them where they were from and where they were going. "We're on our way home from Bethlehem in Judah," the man replied. "I live on the far edge of the Ephraim hill country near Shiloh, but no one has taken us in for the night, even though we have fodder for our donkeys and plenty of food and wine for ourselves." "Don't worry," the old man said. "Be my guest. You mustn't stay here in the square. It's too dangerous." So he took them home with him. He fed their donkeys, and while they rested and afterward they had supper together. So just as they were beginning to warm to the occasion, a gang of sex perverts gathered around the house and began beating at the door and yelling at the old man to bring out the man who was staying with them so they could rape him. The old man stepped aside to talk to them. "No, my brothers, don't do such a dastardly act," he begged, "for he is my guest. Here, take my virgin daughter and this man's wife." My God. "Take my virgin daughter and this man's wife. I'll bring them out, and you can do whatever you like to them, but don't do such a thing to this man." But they wouldn't listen to him. Then the girl's husband pushed her out to them. The girl's husband pushed her out to them. But they wouldn't listen to him. Then the girl's husband pushed her out to them. Got it. And they abused her all night, taking turns raping her until morning. He put his own wife out like that? Finally, just at dawn, they let her go. She fell down at the door of the house and lay there until it was light. When her husband opened the door to be on his way, he found her there fallen in front of the door with her hands digging into the threshold. "Well, come on," he said, "let's get going." "You evil devil." But there was no answer, for she was dead. So he threw her across the donkey's back and took her home. When he got there, he took a knife and cut her body into 12 parts and sent one piece to each tribe of Israel. The entire nation was roused to action against the men of Benjamin because of this awful deed. "There hasn't been such a horrible crime since Israel left Egypt," everyone said. "We've got to do something about it." "Why don't you do something about this man putting his wife out there?" Judges chapter 20, verse 1. Then the entire nation of Israel sent their leaders and 450,000 troops to assemble with one mind before the Lord at Mizpah. They came from as far away as Dan and Beersheba and everywhere in between, and from across the Jordan into the land of Gilead. Word of the mobilization of the Israeli forces at Mizpah soon reached the land of Benjamin. The chiefs of Israel now called for the murdered woman's husband and asked him just what happened. "We arrived one evening," they need to get him. "We arrived one evening at Gibeah, a village in Benjamin," he began. "That night the men of Gibeah surrounded the house planning to kill me, and they raped my wife until she was dead." Yeah, that's because you put her out there. "So I cut her body into 12, and of course the old man that was going to send his daughter and her out. All right, back to the scripture. Verse 6, "So I cut her body into 12 pieces and sent the pieces throughout the land of Israel, for these men have committed a terrible crime. Now then, sons of Israel, express your mind and give me your counsel." And as one man they replied, "Not one of us will return home until we have punished the village of Gibeah. A tenth of the army will be selected by lot as a supply line to bring us food, and the rest of us will destroy Gibeah for this horrible deed." So the whole nation united in this task. Then messengers were sent to the tribe of Benjamin asking, "Did you know about the terrible thing that was done among you? Give up these evil men from the city of Gibeah so that we can execute them and purge Israel of her evil." But the people of Benjamin wouldn't listen. Instead, 26,000 of them arrived in Gibeah to join the 700 local men in their defense against the rest of Israel. Among all these were the 700 men who were left-handed sharpshooters. They could hit a target within a hair's breadth, never missing. The army of Israel, not counting the men of Benjamin, numbered 400,000 men. Before the battle, the Israeli army went to Bethel first to ask counsel of God. Which tribe which tribe shall lead us against the people of Benjamin? They asked. And the Lord replied, Judah shall go first. So the entire army left early the next morning to go to Gibeah to attack the men of Benjamin. But the men defending the village stormed out and killed 22,000 Israelis that day. Then the Israeli army wept before the Lord until evening and asked him, shall we fight further against our brother Benjamin? And the Lord said, yes. So the men of Israel took courage and went out again the next day to fight at the same place. And that day they lost another 18,000, all experienced swordsmen. Then the entire army went up to Bethel and wept before the Lord and fasted until evening, offering burnt sacrifices and peace offerings. The ark of God was in Bethel in those days. Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, grandson of Aaron, was the priest. The men of Israel asked the Lord, shall we go out again and fight against our brother Benjamin, or shall we stop? And the Lord said, go tomorrow. I will see to it that you defeat the men of Benjamin. So the Israeli army set an ambush all around this village and went out again on the third day and set themselves in their usual battle formation. When the army of Benjamin came out of the town to attack, the Israeli forces retreated, and Benjamin was drawn away from the town as they chased after Israel. And as they had done previously, Benjamin began to kill the men of Israel along the roadway running between Bethel and Gibeah, so that about 30 of them died. Then the men of Benjamin shouted, we're defeating them again. But the armies of Israel had agreed in advance to run away so that the army of Benjamin would chase them and be drawn away from the town. But when the main army of Israel reached Baal Tamar, it turned and attacked. And the 10,000 men in ambush west of Geba jumped up from where they were and advanced against the rear army of Benjamin, who still didn't realize the impending disaster. So the Lord helped Israel defeat Benjamin, and the Israeli army killed 25,100 men of Benjamin that day, leaving but a tiny remnant of their forces. Summary of the battle. The army of Israel retreated from the men of Benjamin in order to give the ambush more room for maneuvering. When the men of Benjamin had killed about 30 of the Israelis, they were confident of a massive slaughter, just as on the previous days. But then the men in ambush rushed into the village and slaughtered everyone in it and set it on fire. The great cloud of smoke pouring into the sky was the signal for the Israeli army to turn around and attack the army of Benjamin, who now looked behind them and were terrified to discover that their city was on fire and that they were in serious trouble. So they ran toward the wilderness, but the Israelis chased after them, and the men who had set the ambush came out and joined the slaughter from the rear. They encircled the army of Benjamin east of Gibeah and killed most of them there. 18,000 of the Benjamin troops died in that day's battle. The rest of the army fled into the wilderness toward the rock of Rimmon, but 5,000 were killed along the way and 2,000 more near Gidom. So the tribe of Benjamin lost 25,000 brave warriors that day, leaving only 600 men who escaped to the rock of Rimmon, where they lived for 4 months. Then the Israeli army returned and slaughtered the entire population of the tribe of Benjamin, men, women, children, Jesus, and cattle, and burned down every city and village in the entire land. Judges chapter 21. The leaders of Israel had vowed at Mizpah never to let their daughters marry a man from the tribe of Benjamin. And now the Israeli leaders met at Bethel and sat before God until evening, weeping bitterly. "O Lord God of Israel," they cried out, "why has this happened that now one of our tribes is missing?" So you killed all of them and now you're weeping. Okay. Confusion. The next morning they were up early and built an altar and offered sacrifices and peace offerings on it. And they said among themselves, "Was any tribe of Israel not represented when we held our council before the Lord at Mizpah?" For at that time it was agreed by a solemn oath that anyone who refused to come must die. There was deep sadness throughout all Israel for the loss of their brother Benjamin. "Gone," they kept saying to themselves, "gone. An entire tribe of Israel has been cut off and is gone. And how shall we get wives for the few who remain, since we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them our daughters?" Then they thought again to their oath to kill anyone who refused to come to Mizpah, and discovered that no one had attended from Jabesh Gilead. So they sent 12,000 of their best soldiers to destroy the people of Jabesh Gilead. All the men, married women, and children were slain, but the young virgins of marriageable age were saved. There were 400 of these, and they were brought to the camp at Shiloh. Then Israel sent a peace delegation to the little remnant of the men of Benjamin at Rimmon Rock. The 400 girls were given to them as wives, I guess against their own will, and they returned to their homes, but there were not enough of these girls for all of them. What a sad time it was in Israel in those days, because the Lord had made a breach in the tribe of Israel. You all are the one that did this. "What shall we do for wives for the others, since all the women of the tribe of Benjamin are dead?" The leaders of Israel asked. There must be some way to get wives for them, so that an entire tribe of Israel will not be lost forever. But we can't give them our own daughters. We have sworn with the solemn oath that anyone who does this shall be cursed of God. Suddenly, someone thought of the annual religious festival held in the fields of Shiloh between Lebanon and Bethel along the east side of the road that goes from Bethel to Shechem. They told the men of Benjamin who still needed wives, go and hide in the vineyards. And when the girls of Shiloh come out for their dances, rush out and catch them and take them home with you to be your wives. And when their fathers and brothers come to us in protest, we will tell them, please be understanding and let them have your daughters, for we didn't find enough wives for them when we destroyed Jabesh-Gilead, and you couldn't have given your daughters to them without being guilty. So the men of Benjamin did as they were told and kidnapped the girls who took part in the celebration and carried them off to their own land. Then they rebuilt their cities and lived in them, so the people of Israel returned to their homes. So there was no king in Israel in those days, and every man did whatever he thought was right. This is the word of the Lord.